Hey there, yoga lovers. Welcome to Talk Yoga to Me. We're thrilled to have you with us today as we dive into all things yoga. Whether you're on the mat, in your car, or just relaxing at home, we're here to chat about poses, philosophy, teaching tips, and so much more. So go ahead, roll your mat out, take a deep breath, and let's get started. Talk yoga to me.
Hi, Jimmy.
Hi, Allison.
All right, so today we're going to talk about building a loyal student base. And building a loyal student base takes time, effort, and most importantly, consistency. So, in this episode, we're going to discuss the importance of showing up regularly for your students, how to stay motivated during slow times, and how to create relationships, lasting relationships with your class attendees. So let's reflect on our own journey in building our student base. We'll talk a little bit about the challenges we faced along the way. And before we dive deep into the discussion of building a consistent student base, let's talk about showing up consistently as a teacher. Jimmy, are you a consistent teacher?
I do have some sub requests out that are coming up. I think I'm going to Taylor Swift in a little bit, so
Oh my gosh. But consistency as a teacher, what does it mean to you?
yeah. No, I do think I am pretty consistent as a teacher, and I definitely find it imperative. And there's a lot of different forms of consistency, and when it comes to teaching, I think first and foremost, it's having showing up for your schedule, showing up for your classes, in the most basic form of actually having the class.
Yeah.
Even in those times, especially early on, where it's slow or maybe you don't have any students show up some weeks, but having that time available consistently gives more opportunity for those students to actually come. But also, it comes into how we treat our students before class, the second they walk in the door, and as they're leaving. So trying to get a note to know our students, to be there for them in whatever way feels authentic to you as a teacher. Obviously, upholding any boundaries that you find are important and especially ethical. Um, but yeah, asking your students their names, getting to know them a little bit, and providing a class that they can know what to expect to some extent.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to say too, with all this, there's a big grain of salt of everyone's going to do it different. But if you're a new teacher and you're trying to build a base, these are going to be some tips that you might find helpful.
Yeah, like showing up for one is
Showing
so
up.
important. So, what are some of the challenges of being consistent? So, we've addressed one. It's Taylor Swift. What are some
Yeah.
of the other challenges with being consistent, and what makes being consistent hard?
Yeah. I think some of the early challenges are getting discouraged,
Yeah.
and or taking on too much. Those kind of
Discouraged by what?
discouraged by smaller class attendance.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps maybe you're at a new studio where you don't even have a set schedule. You're on a sub list. So you're kind of going off of other teachers' set
Yeah.
classes or the studio set classes. So yeah, working with what you've got, and if you're committing to a class, giving it your all. It can take months before you start to get a decent base. If you do have your own time slot, your own quote unquote time slot, then being there at that time, being ready to teach, even if the last 2 3 weeks there have been one student or no students, still being ready to teach a full fun class.
A full fun class, no matter
Yeah.
how many people are in the room. Yeah. What do you find that some of the benefits of being consistent are?
Yeah, definitely. I would find that your students, the word of mouth grows, right? So whenever I started to see an uptick in my class attendance, it was because, like, oh, this woman was coming and now she brings her mom and her sister.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I went from like just one person to three with this small group. So providing consistency for your students to depend on gives them more opportunity to then like talk about you to other people and get people excited about your class, because we all know if you're looking to do something new, it's like word of mouth is what's going to get
Yeah.
you there. um, yeah. And for me, I'm still a new teacher, so I'm still definitely building my base, I would say. And I definitely have some weeks that are more attended classes and some weeks that are less. But for you, Allison, you've been teaching for quite a while. How many years now?
Um, what year is it?
20, almost
20,
25, 24.
24. So I've been teaching for almost 7 years. 7 years or
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
And 5 of having your own studio.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you've definitely, I would imagine, you've seen your student base evolve a lot. How is that? How long has it taken for you to kind of develop your
I think
base?
that, um, like, just like teachers, our students have lives outside of yoga, right? So I think that you will always be developing your student base forever. Um, and I say that to say that I've had the same schedule for a couple years now where I teach the same time slots week after week after week. And I try really hard to maintain my schedule at all costs, with the exception of my kids' schedules. I want to show up for what they have going on, so I've learned to take a day off here and there
Mm-hmm.
when needed. Um, but throughout the couple years that I've been teaching as a teacher, and specifically at Roasted, I'll see where I have full classes week after week after week after week, and then suddenly they'll drop off, they'll dwindle down, and then all of a sudden I meet new students, and then those new students start coming week after week after week after week. So I think that building your student base is something that you will do forever, because your students are human, and what is yoga to them? Is it their workout? Is it their time away from home? Is it their relaxation? Did they have specific goals with their yoga class? And all the while they're showing up for their class week after week after week. Has their schedules changed? Did they meet their goals? Did they change their goals? Did something in their life change that prevents them from coming to a yoga class anymore?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just an ongoing journey. So I love every single person that comes to class, and I get so excited for every single person that's there. But it also, like, I know that some of my favorite people, I'm like, oh, I haven't seen you in like over a year. Where have you been? But they have lives too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or they go down different paths. They want to do different things now, and that's okay too. So I think it's also really important to not take things personal as you're building your student base. I
Yeah.
actually recently had a class that was very low attended, and I was like, what is this? I don't know. The energy is so different. It's so bizarre. It's been so long since I've had such a small class that I was like, do we have space to move? And so there's pluses to it too, where I'm like, oh my gosh, we get to move sideways instead of just forward and back. How exciting is this, everyone? So I think, the size of your class doesn't define your worth, and looking at what the benefits are of having small versus large classes,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that says a lot too. That even you like you get pretty packed out classes. I have to say,
Sometimes.
you a lot of the times. But yeah, like there's weeks where maybe something's going on where everyone's just busy.
Yeah.
Because I know what week you're talking about, and it like every class is underintended that week. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, what happened? Well, the weather was bad in part of the state, but really great in other parts. We just happen to be in a beautiful weather time.
Yeah.
It's finally cooling off. Maybe people are barbecuing in the evenings, or
Yeah.
like they're taking a walk in the morning instead of coming to class.
Yep.
And that's not on you, and that's honestly a great thing. Like people are out there enjoying their
Yeah,
lives
exactly.
and not taking that personally, because it didn't have anything to do with how great your classes are, because
Right. It's our
bounces
schedules.
right
It's
back.
life. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know that just as much as anybody. Where I'm like, I have other things I also want to do. So
Hmm.
yeah.
What kind of advice would you give to someone who's just starting out and trying to formulate their class schedules and building consistency into that?
So the one thing I tell all new teachers is to not. We all get so excited. We finish yoga teacher training and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm a teacher. I just want to teach. And we're like, I think I can fit, 9 new classes on the schedule, whatever you want, we got it. And they get really excited, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's really okay to be super excited about teaching yoga. Um, but I think that it's always easier to add than it is to take away. So when you're starting out as a new teacher, um, like start slow, because teaching a 1 hour yoga class is not truly 1 hour. You show up 30 minutes before, you show up 30 minutes after. We know that we're coming to yoga to feel better. But as a teacher, you're coming to yoga because it's your job to put on a 60-minute yoga class. And I say that like lovingly because we all want to be there. I've never left a yoga class where I felt worse. You know what I mean? Even as the teacher. And but it is our job to show up there. And so your 1 hour yoga class is really taking 2 hours of your physical day. And then there's the planning, there's the energy. It doesn't matter if you're feeling tired that day or like if you were the student, you'd rather skip it. You still have to show up for that class. And that can be really overwhelming if you add too much too fast. And especially if you're still learning cues and sequencing and structure, and every class becomes this big project you have to plan the day before or 2 days before, 3 days before. And then all of a sudden you're like, my 3 yoga classes that I thought I wanted right off the bat are taking up every ounce of brain power, and this is too much. I'm burnt out and it's been 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So that's really one of my biggest tidbits of advice for new teachers is to take it slow. Start with one, feel really good about the one that you have, add two when you're ready. And sometimes it's not just when you're ready, it's when there are classes available,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So,
And those are great points. Like, I think that's like huge. And we're already doing something new. We're starting to teach. That's something that you haven't done before. And when you're doing something new, it's going to be more anxious. You're going to be even more anxious about it.
yeah, absolutely.
And you don't want to be like, even before the class is starting, like regretting or like dragging your feet to get there, when it's something that you want to enjoy still. You want to love doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And if right off the bat you're turning it into a chore by taking on too much, like that's going to make it harder to have consistency and longevity as
Yeah.
a teacher. But also too, because like you're new. Like whenever I was new, my first community class, I had like, I don't know, 22 or something people, which is like way too many for the
Yeah,
studio,
the
but
fits that.
every single family member came late of mine, so they just kept coming in, and like, y'all are just gonna be sideways, and it's fine. But then, my first actual class that's not free, one person, two people show up, and that can be discouraging, but you have to go through that to be able to get yourself out there, for people to be exposed to you, to start to come to your classes regularly. And if it becomes a chore that early on because
Yeah.
you took on too much. And the other tip I was going to say too is that get on the sub list and try out adding a second class, because there's almost every week
where
there's
you're
going to
not
be one
committed.
sub
Yeah, you're not
needed.
committed week after week, but you have the opportunity to see what it's like to teach 2 or 3 classes a week.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so smart.
And yeah, what specific strategies help you to encourage students to come back? Actually, I'm going to tell what your strategy is. I already know.
What's my strategy?
Just as your student, who's now turned into your coworker and your co-podcaster.
My co-podcaster. I'm so happy.
Is the connection.
Yeah.
It's the connection that you form with the people that are coming to your classes.
Yeah.
you present yourself authentically in class, but you also do it off your mat as well. And I know you say like the most you talk every week is in your
Yoga.
yoga classes that you teach,
Yeah.
but you would never know. Like you reach out to people and you look out for people, you inquire, and that comes through in the class and off the class. And I guess that's what I'm saying. It's like the consistency of your character. You don't want to be a different person
Yeah.
on the yoga teacher's mat, and
Yeah.
you got that authenticity.
Thank you. That's so sweet of you to say. And all that to say, like, if you've been to my yoga class and I haven't connected with you, also it's hard, right? Like, it's hard to have 18 individual conversations at the end of a yoga class. But I do think it's so important to get to know the people that are coming to your class because, like we just talked about a few minutes ago, it's like, who are they? What are their goals? I've had cross paths with so many students where I'm like, oh, our kids know each other, or things like that too,
Mm-hmm.
you know? You end up finding out like what a small world it is, which is really fun. And you also get to talk to people like, well, why are you coming to yoga? What are you hoping to achieve? Is this your workout? Are you looking for flexibility? Some people are like, oh, I come for weight loss, I come for this. And there's all sorts of different reasons people come. And I think that connecting with people on those reasons can be really fun as a teacher because you can sprinkle things like that into your classes too. I'll have students that are like, I just really want to get a handstand. And I'm like, maybe we're going to sprinkle in some opportunities for you to take a handstand during class. Not necessarily like, hey guys, everybody handstand, but maybe we're going to do more float to the top cues or suggestions, or maybe we're going to do some standing splits that you can maybe find a little jump in,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is really fun too because it helps you to kind of use your teacher toolbox to be like, oh, I know these people are really working on this. I'm going to throw this in here and just see if they like it.
Yeah.
And then we're going to talk about it after class type thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it starts with the conversation and getting to know your students, which is really important.
Yeah.
What about you? Tell me a little bit about your strategies. Also, because you started teaching it roasted, and not only you kind of know it fresh in your mind and from two different scenarios because you were a new teacher when you started teaching your class times at roasted, but they're also new class times. So it's not like you took over somebody's class that was already established. You put a new class on the schedule that students had to get used to. So you're creating like a whole new thing. What are your strategies that you use to connect with your students in those time slots?
Yeah, it can definitely be hard starting in a new time slot, especially like 5 o'clock. That's some people might not even be out of
I have
work
such a hard
yet.
time making it to the studio by that time. I'm usually like it's like 4:57 and I'm like I really don't like to be rushed. I still have to change.
And like traffic is like in most cities, like 5 o'clock, it's gonna be a busier
Yeah.
time on the road. So even people who think they're gonna make it, they might be too late.
Yeah.
So it can be challenging for sure. Every time slot has its own caveats, but for starting out, I think like it's you wrangle your friends and your family.
Yeah.
You post on social media and you tell them what's going on. You invite them personally. You get advocates for you, like my mom who texts all of her friends. I'm sorry if you're my mom's friend and get a text every week about what my class schedule is, and she tries to coax you into it. But yeah, you got to rely on your resources, that your sphere of influence that's already there, and I still have had two classes recently where it was just my mom that showed up. So we did a little community yoga just for her. And then the second time I was like, okay, we're gonna take a break today. You can go do community yoga at your house.
Oh my gosh.
You've taken 1,000 classes, you can do it. But knowing that even as you're building your base, you're going to have those times where it drops off, but still showing up anyways, because you just never know.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have one person signed up and I get there and 7 walk-ins come in. Sometimes I have 4 signed up in the morning, and then by the evening they're all gone.
Yeah.
It just happens. Life happens, and showing up consistently, teaching your classes the way that you intended, regardless of how many students are there. A little caveat of if it's one student, make it more personalized. Whatever feels natural to you, and the level and relationship with that student. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's so important. I love that you touched on like bringing your friends and family because I would do the same thing. I always, when I was a new teacher starting out and when Roasted was new and it was still kind of, being around that COVID time where the studio was closed right after opening and then reopening, and everybody was a little bit nervous about yoga, just being in a closed room with people type thing post COVID. A lot of classes that I taught would have one person signed up. So I would call my husband and I'd be like, hey, you're coming. And you need to pretend like you don't know me so it feels like a class. Don't come in acting like my husband. Come in and be like, hi, I'm here for class tonight. But it feels like a class. And also that gave me a level of comfort to teach a class where I was like, I know at least one person in the room is going to know what's going on. Because I'm teaching my husband week after week, dragging him to yoga class. And then it feels like a class. I know that it's two-sided, right? If you're teaching a yoga class and you only have one person, you kind of have to be comfortable teaching to one person. But also if you come to a yoga class as a student and you're one person, you have to be comfortable being a one-person class. Which also is not something that a teacher should take personal, because I've been to a yoga class before where I was the only person. So when I was new to yoga, I was in my YTT and I was like, well, I have to get these hours in, so I'm staying for this class. Because I have seen students where they're like, am I the only one? It's okay, we don't have to do this. And they leave type thing. Or they do and they stay, but then they don't come back after that because they're like, that was weird. Maybe it wasn't weird. Again, maybe it was just that was their only time to try yoga, and they didn't have another option after that. So yeah, I think I like that you were like, hey, we bring our family and we bring our friends, and I personally invite people and things like that too, because it can definitely help from both the teacher and the student perspective.
And on a solo student class, I think it's definitely not taking it personal if they decide not to take it, because there's a lot of pressure one-on-one. If someone's new, especially, they might not be looking for that kind of a class. But I try to have the conversation about it, lead as the teacher, lead that student and let them know, hey, like, it's actually just you today, if it comes up and it feels natural to, hey, it's actually just you today, we're both here, I'm happy to teach if, like, you're ready to go, let's do this. And make it positive of, like, you're ready and happy to teach, but giving them the question, because they might not be comfortable with that. And that's okay.
Yeah, and I like that point too, where it's like you're leading with the like, hey, I'm here and I'm happy to teach you, versus like, hey, you're the only one, do you still want class?
Yeah.
And kind of leading with that hint of like, hey, I actually want to go home, so
yeah, because
do you want to be here?
They're gonna read that as you don't want to be there, and you do want to be there. You want to be there.
You want to be there, absolutely.
And then too,
part of being consistent.
Yes, yes, that attitude of being ready to go and happy for whoever walks through the door to be able to teach them. And then I also, the other part, if it's like a powerful class, like telling them, hey, communicate if you need a break or whatever, because that one-on-one attention, the student's going to think that they have to do every single thing that you say.
Because you're watching them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're going to get gassed way sooner than usual. I've been on the receiving end of that, and even as like a decently practiced student, I was struggling.
Yeah.
Like, I had to have the door open. 15 minutes in, I'm sitting down because I'm pushing much harder than I usually would, and
because you're the only one they're watching, kind of thing. I have taught a couple one-person classes where I was like, hey, and it was people I knew, and they came to one class, and I was like, hey, I'm just gonna practice with you, so we're both comfortable, kind of thing. When I was like new to teaching, I don't want to say new to teaching, but I was new to kind of having like one person classes, and I was building relationships with people and all these things. Um, and I would just be like, hey, I'm gonna put my mat next to yours, and we're gonna be in the center of the room. We're both gonna look in the mirror, and we're gonna practice together. So I'm gonna move with you. Is that how I would normally teach all classes? No, absolutely not. But it was a way to make it a little bit more comfortable for the student. So
Yeah.
it wasn't like your knee's not bent enough in this
Mm-hmm.
high lunge like type thing.
Yeah.
And then I've done the flip side where I've been like, well, we can treat this more like a private. Like, what are you working on? Let's curate it to that.
Yeah.
Which is fun too.
I like those options.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, how do you stay motivated when class numbers are small?
I look at the bright side. Like, I like to look at the bright side, and I think it's easier for me to do it now because I'm not used to having small classes. Where when class is full, the studio I don't think has, like, if you have a 22 person class, there's not enough props for 22 people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So also when you're 22 deep in the room, you only have a few inches in between mats. So doing things sideways on your mat is kind of out of the question. Or we make jokes about, like, you know, don't sit on your friends or whatever kind of jokes we make during class. I don't know. Don't hit your friends, don't kick your friends, don't sit on your friends, like all the things. So I try to look at the bright side. Again, it's easier for me to do it now because I'm not scrutinizing my own teaching where I'm like, oh, people aren't coming because I'm not doing a good job.
Mm-hmm.
It's more so like, oh, people aren't coming because something was going on today. School sports, festivals in Destin, like people going out of town, people coming in town, bad weather, all the things are different. But I look for the bright side, and I'm like, hey, we have a smaller class today, so guess what we're gonna do? We're gonna use straps because normally we can't, and we're gonna move this way because normally we're just this way. So
yeah, get that horizontal movement going.
Yeah,
some
like,
gate pose or whatever. Yeah.
I'm like, look at all the space we have. And when you have a small class, when you're normally used to having like larger classes, people will set up really close together at the beginning of class, expecting to make room for everybody. So when I do have a small class, I acknowledge that the class is smaller and more comfortable and more intimate. And I'm like, hey, everybody, take a moment, spread out. Like, you don't have to be that close to your neighbor. We have the whole room to ourselves. How great is this? Like, we want to make space to be able to move side to side. And I think that just kind of sets the tone for students being like, oh, we're all happy to be here.
Yeah.
Or at least that's where my mind goes.
In those early days when you were, getting your husband to come in so there wouldn't be just one student.
Yeah.
What mindset, how did you like manage that with your mindset to stay encouraged to continue to teach?
So I say I forced him to come all the time, but he couldn't come all the time, you know what I mean? So
Sure.
there were definitely days where it was just me one-on-one with people, and there was a lot of like, I don't know, we put ourselves in this place where we're like, oh, I'm gonna teach it. If I build it, they will come. And you're like, that doesn't always help, or that doesn't always happen, right? So staying positive through that, no matter how many people come to class, can be really, really challenging. This is probably going to sound weird because for most areas, an early morning class is like the way to go, right? You can get your class in, be done, carry on about your day, and it's great. Here with my experience in teaching the early morning classes, I always only had like one or two people in class with me. And that was even after I was having like busy evening classes. And so staying motivated for those when I'm waking up at like 5 a.m. to get ready to go to yoga for one person who also overslept and then didn't end up showing up kind of thing. Those became really discouraging after a little while. And then, but it was cool because you still see that student base grow where I did it for week on week on week on week, week after week after week after week. And it was like one person started coming consistently, and then a second person started coming consistently, and then I'd have like two or three others who would drop in here or there. And then as the fourth person started coming consistently, the first person dropped off, kind of thing. And so, and it was just this pattern where I was like, why can't I ever get more than like 2 to 3 people in this 6 a.m. class? And then the time changed. It was the time change where you spring forward. So now early morning is even earlier. So then I had to have a conversation with myself where I was like, maybe this class time isn't for me,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And I think that it's okay to do that, but I think that's I mean, I taught that class for 6 months before I made that decision.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't something that I was like, oh, 2 weeks in a row again.
That's not enough time.
It's not enough time, right? And I
Yeah.
was like, you know, there are seasons of change where these class times really don't make sense at this season based on the feedback that I'm getting from people who are coming, right?
Sure.
So I think that it's just kind of having those realistic conversations with yourself where you're like, hey, I show up and I'm happy to teach every single time I'm here, whether it's one person, 10 people, 20 people. And regardless, sometimes you have to have those conversations with yourself even about full classes where you're like, 20 people in this class every single week, and this is just not working for my schedule right now, you know?
Yeah.
So, that's kind of how I would describe that.
So maybe it's if you build it, remain consistent, then they will come.
Yeah.
And sometimes you may still need to change.
And sometimes you still may need to change.
After months and months.
Yeah. Sometimes sometimes you can know right away, but also give things a chance. Ask yourself why. Like, why it's bothering you that those classes don't have people in them. Because also, I enjoyed waking up that early because if nobody came, I did my own practice, got that out of the way for myself for the day, and then got to carry on about my life. You know what I mean? So, always looking for those little, like, golden moments.
I think that's a good tip, too, of making use of the time anyways, whether you're going to do your own practice then that morning, maybe you're recording some social media stuff, or working on your alignment with some videos, or like some community yoga and cleaning the studio a little deeper that day, a little
absolutely
karma yoga, you know? There's always options.
So many options. How do you ensure that new students feel welcome and encouraged to return?
I try to remember their names, but I am really bad with names. So if you are one of our students and I've
that's why you have a roster.
I know.
Oh my gosh.
And I don't do this, but I have seen another teacher do it, and I think it's something I probably should do. They would like take a note card and write all the students' names on it and like tuck it in their pocket kind of thing. But they would take a minute. I think too it was the physically writing it down helped them remember the names.
Yep.
And then also they could reference it kind of slyly if they wanted, because people aren't gonna be able to tell from across the room. And then using their names. I don't usually. It kind of goes back to what we talked about in another episode of that kind of individualized attention. I don't use people's names while teaching in class, but this teacher did, and I thought that was really cool. Of you can, great adjustment, Allison, and it helps people feel encouraged, feel connected to you. So those are the tips that I don't do. So what do I actually do? That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, talk to them before class. If it's a smaller class where it's like 2 friends or just one other student, asking them what they're working on, asking them what they want to do in class today, how their bodies are feeling, and tune into that instead. Hey, my hip's hurting me, I need some movement in there. Yeah. And take that time, take that opportunity to kind of flip what might have been, you down on yourself about just one person showed up. No, this is an opportunity to really improve a relationship with the student and maybe help them with their practice in a way that you couldn't in a large class. And encouraging them to return. Tell them what's going on at the studio. If you got workshops coming up, let them know what those are.
Do you follow up with them after class or outside of yoga too?
Yes, so my kind of rule that I give myself is if I didn't have the time to talk to them before class, I talk
Mm-hmm.
to them after
Oh,
class.
I love that.
Because it's usually there will be some students who come early and they're
Yeah.
new. I'll get that time to talk with them, and then I'll kind of beeline to the students that I didn't get to talk to yet for after, and that gives me a way to check in, learn about like what level they're at, like maybe give them a little bit of feedback if they seem interested in that, or just like ask them what brought them in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that. Um, so you follow up with them, or you talk to them before, follow up with them after, and you try to like touch on every student, which is nice too, because that can be really hard. It's also some people like they're just so quiet. They come in, they beeline for their spot. Class ends, they roll up their mat and they beeline for the door, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
ah. That's when I forget names because I'm like, I don't know. Off the
Yeah.
top of my head, you're moving too fast.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And that's okay. Like that's their maybe they're busy, they got stuff going on before and after, or maybe they're just a little shy, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But that can definitely be a bit more of a challenge when they're super quick in and out of the studio.
Yeah.
Yeah, so can you share a time with us when your student base started to wane and kind of decrease a little bit and what you did to rebuild it?
I think that happens, like for me specifically as a teacher, like I think that just happens. Like we were talking about earlier, I think it comes down to a lot of like not personal things, but also like students' lives outside of yoga.
Mm-hmm.
So can I think of a specific event that occurred? Not particularly, but I know that student attendance is up and down and up and down. Um, I mean, honestly, though, the one time that I lost the majority of my student base was when I decided to stop teaching, where I went through a little bit of like a severe burnout phase.
Oh man.
And I was like, oh, I'm gonna just step back from teaching for a little while. And then to jump back into teaching, it took a few weeks for me to like get back into it and get reconnected with all the students that like I hadn't seen in so long.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just one of those things where staying consistent and connecting with your students is so important. And I'm always like, yoga's where I make all my friends. And I'm like, I'm your friend if you've come to my class. We only hang out at yoga though, because that's how much free time I have in a day.
Yeah.
But I think it's just something that happens, and I think it's something you can't get down on yourself over. And consistency is going to be your best friend, and the people who are meant to be in your class are going to be in your class. Like I try really hard not to think too much of the people who are like, oh, your class is too hard for me, so I don't come to this one anymore. And I'm like, that's okay. I hope that you found a yoga class that resonates with you and you feel comfortable in.
Mm-hmm.
And not just don't take those things personally. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have any advice you would give to teachers about building classes?
Yeah, I outside of consistency, and starting low and slow, so we hopefully don't get to burnout. But also, like when you get burnout, you have to take the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you have to.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to just take a pause because it did come back. Like your students did come back, but it just goes to show too that yeah, it takes time for the word to get out for people to know. Oh, Allison's back teaching. You know, they have to see it on Instagram like 3 or 4 times, maybe even more before they realize. But I would say getting creative. We've recently started a like pop-up yoga class at East Pass Coffee Company, a local coffee shop, and trying to do things where rather than just getting your you know dedicated clientele to come more frequently, trying to expand out into a group of people that maybe don't know much about yoga, wouldn't usually do yoga, but in just a little bit of a different setting or a different exposure, and maybe even a more generalized kind of not hatha vinyasa, but just a yoga class.
Just yoga. Just yoga for everybody.
Might be less intimidating, and then more people come. And it's silly, but yeah, posting to social media, and following the people who are interacting with you and coming into the studio to practice. So if you're a new teacher at a new studio and other teachers have, quite a few students and you're still building, go into those classes and maybe they start to recognize you. Oh, like you teach here, don't you? And then they'll see your practice and maybe want to come to your classes too.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I don't think we talked about that yet, but going to classes is really, really important to kind of connect with your students. Because a lot of times students aren't, I only go to one class a week. They're usually coming to a variety of classes, and sometimes it's just getting to know people, and it's truly that simple.
Yeah. And consistency builds trust. And trust keeps students coming back to the studio, coming back to your classes, wanting to learn more about yoga, and feeling confident and building their strength and flexibility. So, as a teacher, it's important to just stay patient and committed to your teaching, and your students and your student base will gradually grow. Next time, we'll dive into a slightly different topic of Workshops 101, why you should teach and attend them. These can elevate your teaching and offer students a new way to explore their practice. So stay tuned.
All right, until next time, take care of yourself and talk yoga to me again soon.
Bye.
Bye.